Hi, everyone. Good evening. Welcome. We're going to be screening. My name is Diana Sanchez. I am the co-curator for Sui Generis, an alternative history of Mexican cinema. And it's my distinct pleasure to welcome you to tonight's opening event for this unique retrospective. It's a screening of Guillermo del Toro's CRONOS. How many of you have, isn't that, thank you. So how many of you have seen this film in the cinema? Oh, okay. A few, not that many. I want to give a big thank you to the Harvard Film Archive. We could not find a print, and then we got it from them like last week, and it's such a pleasure to be able to show it here in 35. To begin, we would like to acknowledge that tonight's event is taking place on the treaty territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work in the community. On behalf of TIFF, I would like to thank our lead sponsor, Bell, our major sponsors, RBC, L'Oreal Paris, Visa, and our public supporters, Ontario Creates and the Canada Council for the Arts. As a charitable organization, we would also like to thank our donors and members for making TIFF's year-round programming and educational and community outreach initiatives possible. Thank you to Classic FM Radio and Zoomer Radio, our program sponsors. So tonight's event is the kickoff of the TIFF Cinematheque Retrospective Sui Generis, an alternative history of Mexican cinema. We've been working on this for quite a while. We are going to be screening films from today on till April 7th. We're featuring a number of archival prints. This series is an opportunity for the audiences to appreciate the rich tapestry of Mexico's national cinema, revisit well-known classics, and experience the diversity and caliber of works produced in the country. And if you want more information, please look at tiff.net/Mexico. I'd like to give a big thank you to my co-curator, Guillermo del Toro. He's amazing. He's got an encyclopedic knowledge of cinema. I have, delved into Mexican cinema in a way that I never would have thought possible. I've discovered some really, really interesting films, and it's been a privilege to work with Guillermo and bring these treasures of Mexican cinema to Toronto. And I really would like to thank the Cinematheque team. It's been so much fun to work with you guys. Brad Dean, Sam LaFrance, Amanda Brayson, Lydia Alguang. We have been like detectives scouring the world for these treasures, and we found them and we got them here. And so excited to finally be launching this. Also, big thank you to Daniela Ponce, who has been promoting the series, and it's a wonderful team to work with. Thank you, guys. So, before we get to the film that we're going to see tonight, it's a Guillermo's debut that announced the arrival of a fresh voice on the international film scene. I will talk to you a little bit about what it was like to co-curate the series with Guillermo, how we got to these 25 films. And then I'm going to read an introduction that Guillermo sent me at like midnight last night, asking me to say, yes, he would have loved to be here, but he's on a plane. So a couple of years ago, I got a call from Jesse Wente, who was then our head of film programs, and he asked me, so would you like to co-curate a series on Mexican cinema with Guillermo del Toro? As you can imagine, I jumped at the chance. I mean, this is an opportunity to delve into cinema from Mexico with one of its most unique creators. Then started researching because I wanted to appear very knowledgeable in front of Guillermo, like he knows everything about Mexican cinema, and that's also one of the fun parts. Talking with the Cinematheque in Mexico City, the Mexican Film Institute, IMCINE, and the University Archive FICUNAM. They've also provided us with a lot of the films, and I spoke with a lot of film festival experts that work at the festivals across Mexico. And then I started to kind of panic because we had 25 films that we were supposed to show, and then we were supposed to curate, somehow encompass this like really rich and varied cinematic history. I mean, Mexico is one of the first countries to film its own revolution. After peace, the film industry really took off. From the early 30s to the early 60s, Mexico experienced what's now referred to as a golden age, the golden age of Mexican cinema. Mexican films were seen all over Latin America, and it had a star system that rivaled that of Hollywood's. Mexican actors like Pedro Infante, that you can see in Nosotros los Pobres, and Andrea Palma, The Woman from the Port, were household names across Latin America. in addition to its melodramas, there is also a strong tradition of horror, film noir, as well as a lot of political cinema. And it was also important to speak to all this, this diversity through 25 films. How are we going to do that? So Guillermo, we're chatting, thinking of what we can do, and we thought we'd split it up into 2 series. So this series it encompasses from the early 30s to the early 90s. So we went from kind of golden age to the new Mexican cinema with filmmakers such as Gita Shifter, Maria Navarro, of course, Guillermo del Toro, and Alfonso Cuarón. So you can see Cuarón's first feature here in the series. In English, it's called Love in the Time of Hysteria. It's Solo con tu pareja in Spanish. That film premiered at TIFF in, I think, '89 as a gala. So it had its world premiere here, and now we're going to be showing it as part of this series. And someone on my team, Daniela, she told me that it has a cameo with his real-life nanny in the film. Anyway, so the list is still very long, even if we're reducing it to this time frame. We still I had over 50 musts, and Guillermo had a lot of others. I didn't have the heart to cut stuff, like we're talking about masters of Mexican cinema. Guillermo did not have this problem, luckily. He's got a very clear vision, and with a lot of chatting back and forth, we were able to put together the 25 films that you'll be able to see over the next month. So as we fine-tune the list, I was starting to really see a narrative emerge, and it speaks not only to Mexico's rich cinematic tradition, but to a real boldness in filmmaking, and as well a genre blending, a blending of genres that is prevalent today and especially prevalent in the cinema of Guillermo del Toro. I mean, nobody blends genre better than he does, in my opinion. So one of the films that I really, urge you to see that captures the spirit, and it's also, I know, one of Guillermo's, one of the films that really inspired him, is called The Skeleton of Mrs. Morales. It's playing March 16th. It's a 1960 film by Rogelio A. Gonzalez, and it begins as a melodrama with some comedic overtones before converting to a full-on scary gothic horror, and it ends as a criminal noir-like procedural, all the while speaking to the tension between modernity and religious traditionalism. That's another topic that you'll see a lot in the films in the series. So more genre-blending film, Another Dawn by Julio Bracho. It's screening April 7th. This one blends romantic melodrama with political noir. There's a lot of really interesting films. Poison for the Fairies. If you've ever seen Beautiful Creatures, that New Zealand film, it's kind of like a Mexican Beautiful Creatures. It's really freaky. We're showing 2 Buñuels, of course. Los Olvidados tomorrow, Exterminating Angel as well. Films about the revolution to student demonstrations. Our Friend Mendoza from 1933 speaks to the Mexican Revolution. And the 1976 film Canoa speaks about the student demonstrations. I really recommend a lot of these films. Saturday, we have Arturo Ripstein. I don't know if you know this filmmaker, but he is a wonderful Mexican filmmaker. And he's going to be in town showing 2 films. One of them is called The Castle of Purity. Has anyone seen Dogtooth, the Yorgos Lanthimos film? This one's better, in my opinion. And he made it in like 1973. So it's a precursor to Lanthimos' film, and it is apparently based on the same story. That's what I read. I'm not sure if that's exactly true, but that's a must-see. And then he'll also be showing the first collaboration that he did with his screenwriter, Pasalicia Garcia Diego. She'll also be in town, and they'll be showing their film, The Realm of Fortune. Now, some words from Guillermo, and then we will get to the film. So, he asked me to, yes, you read this last night. Ever since partaking for my first communion, and longer before that, the Eucharist freaked me out. The fact that we would drink the blood of Jesus and eat his flesh, not as a symbol, not as representation, but as the actual flesh and blood, transmogrified from wine and bread. This alchemical act to turn vile matter into sublime, immortal one, occupied my young mind. I read about Catholic dogma. I was the spokesperson for the Virgin Mary at my Jesuit school religion club. Alchemy, the 60s and 70s had a strange neo-paganism movement that originated in Europe, and vampirism. And all the while, I lived with my very Catholic grandmother or with my parents in a house so vast that we could go for weeks without ever seeing each other. During those years, a strange fashion fad, the maqueche, started getting popular around in my hometown. Live beetles were mounted in gold chains and worn as living brooches. I was an amateur entomologist, and that added the final layer to CRONOS. What if a living insect could carry the virus of vampirism? After all, the chichi fly carried a strange disease that provoked a death-like lethargy. And insects and lower life forms had been known to be able to last incredibly long periods without nourishment. Sorry. I was reading voraciously occult treatises, entomology, biology, horror, literature, etc. And all this combined in a melting pot, but I always knew where the strands were coming from. The very last piece of the puzzle came to me when my grandmother took ill and was bedridden until her final days. I felt that if I had been a young kid, I would have cared for her, no matter what the infirmity was, and that could have included vampirism, of course. I was very ambitious with my first film. I color-coded it with the colors of the alchemical process and took great pains to put into it humor, absurdity, B-movie scenes, poetic moments, and incredibly ambitious imagery for a debut in 1991 to 1993. 10 years before that, knowing that there were no FX companies in Mexico, I decided to found my very own, Necropia, Inc. I learned every technique possible, first on my own, and then by the side of Dick Smith, and then the company was able to do CRONOS a decade later. The film has many collaborators that I would treasure for years to come. Guillermo Navarro, my DOP and pal, who was the very first Mexican cinematographer to win an Oscar for Pan's Labyrinth. Federico Lupi, one of the most remarkable actors I ever met, and who would work with me again in The Devil's Backbone and Pan's Labyrinth. Berta Navarro, who to this day remains my partner in all Latin American productions, and Lorenza Newton and her father. Lorenza and I had married recently and remained together many decades, and worked on the sculpting and applying the makeup FX. I sculpted the tail of the insect. Lorenza created many foam appliances, and I think she was one of the best at applying them. Her father mechanized all the CRONOS devices in the film and designed these mechanisms using mostly internal wind-up toy parts inside real silver and gold pieces. Yes, these Fabergé egg precious things were precious for real, which led to them being stolen at the end of the shoot. The film was done for $1.5 million, but due to a loan taken personally by Berta and me, the interest accrued another $500K. I started my North American career to pay for my share of that debt. There is much more to be said, and I would have liked to be there with you, but present circumstances prevent me from doing so. I thank you for coming to our Sui Generis and hope you see Mexican films you will never stumble upon anywhere else. So enjoy the film, enjoy the series. Thank you so much for being here, and yeah, let's enjoy CRONOS once again. Thank you.